Hi, welcome to Business Influencers. My name is Chris Salem, your host. Welcome here. If you found us here at TALRadio. And again, we are excited if this is your first time here with Business Influencers. And we highly encourage you to check out the other shows that we have on the Touch of Life Foundation radio platform here at talradio.org. Again, we are excited to have you here. And again, our show also is syndicated through Apple, Spotify, and also here the video portion on YouTube. So we highly encourage you to follow us there as we have many of our great guests sharing their words of wisdoms to help elevate your business and personal influence to the next level. Because without influence, we cannot impact others through our value systems to really create a shift and them being a part of their own solutions to create their own results. And it all starts with you being a business influencer. So welcome here if this is your first time. Today's show is being brought to you today by Alumni Direct. Alumni Direct is a new social media community platform dedicated to bringing alumni together from all different generational types and an opportunity to meet new people for the first time. Now, this is a membership program, meaning it takes all the noise out of social media. No more of those noisy notifications. You get to come in and generate genuine and authentic relationships on your time with the content and the types of people that you want to interact with. If you would like some more information about Alumni Direct, check them out at alumnidirect.com. That's alumnidirect.com. Well, we got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about constructing your new belief system. Now, granted, it's not changing who you are, but you're going to be learning how, when we can develop a new belief system, how this can now reflect outward in terms of the value that you're creating, not only to yourself, but to other people around you, especially in business. And every master influencer understands that our belief systems manifest itself outward. And well, we're going to be talking with an expert in this area. His name is Jeffrey Besecker. And Jeffrey, before I introduce him, he is a holistic behavioral coach who guides everyday people towards beneficial change in their unconscious behavioral patterns. These shifts in behavior empower us to live richer, happier, and more fulfilling lives. Lingering just below the surface of our conscious minds are patterns of thought, feelings, emotions, and motivations. We aren't immediately aware of them, but they wield a powerful influence over how we behave and react to events in our everyday lives. You're going to learn about how his programs explore the darkest corners of the human mind and reveal how our subconscious and unconscious patterns play a pivotal role in our ability to make decisions as individuals and as a society, as course as a business. And without further ado, we welcome Jeffrey Besecker to the show. Jeffrey, how you doing today?
Fantastic. Thank you for having me, Christopher. I am so excited to interact with you and your community today as we look at belief systems.
Well, Jeff, let's go right into it. I love this particular area. I think that, it's like with anything, without a foundation, you don't have legs to stand on. And if we're not operating from the right mindset or belief systems or a belief system that can actually help us to solidify that foundation, then it's like we're operating on quicksand. So let's talk about the importance of mindset and belief and a belief system that actually can serve us and others moving forward.
So let's start by looking at our belief systems. They serve as the core function of forming our perspective. They shape our behaviors. They interact with our emotions. And they also guide our relationships, not only with our sense of self, our constructed sense of self, our identity, but how we relate with others. So in that regard, we look at that typically and we think culturally only the mind. Yet at a deeper aspect, it calls into nearly every foundational element of our human being, bringing in our internal processes and our somatics, our systems such as emotional regulation that rely heavily on internal processes. So shifting our perspective today, perhaps to begin with, looking at how all of those pieces come together to form a very strong foundation for creating adaptive belief systems.
Wow. I love that. That is so great. And, when you talk about this, Jeff, I mean, it must be there's a process I would take. The key is like, I guess, awareness. We got to be aware that somehow what we're doing isn't moving us forward, or could actually be getting in our way and actually causing the things that we want to make better. We're pushing it farther away because of how we're thinking, and again, those belief systems that we maybe are operating subconsciously from our childhood days. What would you share with the audience here today? Like, besides awareness, because that's why they're here and they're hearing this, what could be like one of the things that people can do to start moving things forward in a positive way in this area?
So let's start, Christopher, by looking at how our approach serves our clients. Our core modality and approach of behavioral coaching addresses a wide range of emotional, mental, physiological, and psychological factors. That to us forms those core foundational elements. First looking at our emotions, because our emotions dictate and influence every interaction we have throughout life. That also stimulates where we go mentally, where our brain processes go. We often think mindset, yet mind surfaces in a number of different processes throughout our physiological processes. Everything from gut-based intuition to heart rate coherence, and where our heart starts to come and play into that. I don't know that today we're going to dissect every element of that.
Oh yeah, I don't think we can do everything in a short period of time, but at least get a macro view of it.
As humans, we have a lot of complex systems and functions that interact. Every one of those aspects contributes a factor to how our belief systems are formed, how those beliefs interplay, and how we allow them or guide them to play out as human beings.
Wow. That's great. And it's so powerful, like you said, and how it's either serving us or not serving us. And I can attest to that, being an example of that. Many, back for the first 2 years of my life, I operated from my limiting beliefs I didn't know I even had at the time, and how I had to shift those to where what I do today, and how that all took place over time. Discuss, Jeff, why. I mean, obviously this is an individual thing. People have to do this at the individual level, but talk about like why this can be so beneficial for not only the individual, but how it can impact people in their if they're building a brand for themselves, if they run a business, if they're a spouse or a parent or a member in their society, whatever that may be. How people, they make a commitment towards this process, how it can really significantly change for the better, those particular areas that people play roles in, and the duties associated with it.
So let's start by reeling that back a little bit. So often we view that through that perspective, that it's only an individualistic endeavor. Our values and beliefs are shared.
That's
By and
true.
large, it's a cultural aspect. Sometimes we come into conflict with that idea. We share ideas, we share values, we share perspectives. When we resist that notion of sharing, sometimes creates that limited belief to begin with, where we don't realize, first and foremost, as humans existing consciously, we're all interconnected. Now, there are those ideas and those concepts that come up that can create that conflict or that resistance, where inherently it might not be a shared value. That can become a whole nother series of interesting conversations and talks as we dissect that. So let's start by looking, though, at that idea of values, of shared values. It's essential.
I think that is so important. I mean, you think about
that they're interconnected.
Talk about that. I'd love to hear it, because I think that effective communication and how people can improve communication as a family, as a business unit, as an organization, as a community, a society, like you said, it's got to be that connection on those shared values.
That's an interesting area to dive in. As you said, leaning in today, we're not going to challenge our identities. Yet, our perspectives are largely formed by those identities, and sometimes we have to challenge or question them. Sometimes we become overly ingrained or personalized with those perspectives. This is my belief and my value. Sometimes when we run into that conflict socially, where it might have a conflict with another person's values, views, opinions, where culturally there's a lot of different ways that surfaces, where we have those adaptive, helpful perspectives, and sometimes those maladaptive or unhelpful perspectives. Where do we form that line of shared value and belief that creates a sense of cultural unity, that creates a sense of cohesion throughout our humanity? Has to come into play there, and that's largely dictated by how we associate with our sense of self.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And so true. And the shared values, what resonated, what you said is we said share doesn't mean we have to have the same value, right? Like if I'm transparent, honest, and come from integrity, it doesn't mean every person that I'm going to communicate or we can, do something really big together and influence others in a positive way have to have the same values. We can have shared values, something that can relate to those. They could be ethical, trustworthy, or whatever those values may be. And what would you recommend how people understand about what those values are, how to pick up on them and how to connect better on those?
Let's start first by looking at your identity, where those cultural aspects come into play early on. Starting at a very young age, around the age of 2 or 3, we start to form that sense of identity. Those things we call self are nothing more than a series of ideas, values, beliefs, constructs, foundational elements that we're basically piecing together throughout life. We have external influence with cultural aspects of it, with our family values and family systems. We have larger social structures with in-group and out-group dynamics. Who do we associate with? Who do we consider other? A lot of times becomes counterproductive or productive a lot of times. So we're looking at those core values and systems again, how we relate to that personally or not personally sometimes is very influential. Sometimes we become overly ingrained with the personalization of that, right down to the idea of, is it my value or a belief, or is it just simply a concept, a perspective, and a view we're able to step back and consider? Are we able to set our beliefs out there and hold them loosely and not feel that need to dominate them, not that need to control them, not that need to personalize them, and say, it's simply data and information at its core?
That makes sense. I love that. And the thing is that if people that are listening, whether if they're individuals, owners of small to mid-sized companies that listen to this show, why is this more important than ever? As we move forward in this world that we live in today.
That's a whole lot of interesting perspectives of belief we can start to consider and hold loosely. Is it truly more important than ever, or is that a projected belief we've leveraged toward it based on a lot of factors? Starts to open this can of worms that we can look at. Is it more important than ever? Why are we focusing more relevance on that?
Yeah, I think it's like, because again, a lot of organizations tend to want to manage problems and not actually solve them, and for whatever reason that may be, like what could be things that can be really moving them forward.
So in that regard, developing that fluidity of being able to consider and hold different perspectives loosely. So what we often do is cement to a specific foundation, structure, or system of beliefs to where we've formed that narrowing of perspective. We performed that narrowing of identity more than anything. Who and what do I believe this human being to be? Sometimes we have to be a little more fluid and adaptive in those concepts themselves. We base that largely on the structure of the psyche and its ego processes.
Mm.
Looking at that belief system itself, culturally, we've been programmed and ingrained with a lot of patterns of belief, a lot of foundational structures. What the ego means, often coming into that play where there tends to be a lot of social conflict in a lot of regards from a certain perspective. Now, you'll find me, I try to keep very loose in my presentation because over time, as you start to develop that ability to spot when you're starting to jump into a limiting belief, rather than being so cemented and certain about this is the way, we're able to say this is one way to view it. So looking at one way to view that idea of identity is largely, again, a series of constructed values, beliefs, emotional interactions, cultural influences, and we wrestle with that a lot of the time simply out of that challenge to our sense of survival. It's largely ingrained and wired into our default neural programming. Neural programming extending not only in the brain, but throughout all of our somatic systems. Again, we look at things like where our gut interaction is, the gut-brain axis, without going too deep into that. There's that interaction of hormones, of emotional chemicals that come in. I'm not going to go too broad with your audience today. We can dive really deeply into that, but there's literally an infinite number of processes that come into play there that aren't simply in the brain. So getting into that idea that identity is largely beyond just a mindset. Who and what we feel we are comes into play there. How we emotionally interact with that comes into play. Those are all processes of the psyche that carry out through ego filters and processes.
Wow. I love that. Great information there. And I think this is so important. I mean, with mindset. So talk a little bit about, obviously when we're making these shifts, this is a process. It's not like we flip a switch and these things go off overnight. What do you find? What do you find is the best approach? Yeah, a lot of people wish they could do that, but what do you find it would be if somebody now hearing this is like, hey, I'm ready to do something, or if I'm a business and I'm thinking about incorporating this into my business, and that has to start with me, the decision maker or the owner. What is that? What be beside? We talked about awareness, obviously, because that's why they're hearing this. But like, what's a typical? Is there like one way, or there could be several ways to get to where we want to go?
How many different kind of human beings surface?
Yeah, that's true, because everyone's going to be different.
How many different interactions do we have?
Yeah.
Is there one way to do anything? And so sometimes that becomes that
a belief
system.
Yeah, like a certain belief
where we're narrowed. We're automatically creating boundaries that do what? You're trying to create certainty in that false sense of control. What can we realistically control in life? I'm going to pose that question to you.
Please talk. I like that, because what can we control, what we can't
realistically control from our perspective? And are there ways those values and beliefs themselves can become kind of distorted or filtered? I'll put it that way because I have this kind of right field perspective that says sometimes it's convoluted, which that itself can be kind of picked apart and dissected. But to go more neutral and more of the observational, we're simply looking at the idea. Sometimes it's distorted or filtered from that perspective of certainty and control. So posing that original question, what can we really and holistically control?
I would think that what we could control, I mean, at least for me, what I've been practicing is I can control my communication to myself and others. I can always choose to be more assertive rather than passive or aggressive, because I used to be very passive in my communication and my behavior was very aggressive. So I was a passive aggressive. So I can control my communication, my behavior, my attitude, how I look at things, seeing things happening for me, not to me. I think I can control my emotions and how I respond versus react to situations and people. I can choose, even from a negative emotion, I can choose to respond from a positive emotion, not the negative emotion, even though I'm not negating the negative emotion. I'm using the negative emotion to express what I got to work on, what do I have to make better. And then my action, my whatever action I'm going to take. I feel like, but I can't control those same five things in other people.
So, what if I were to tell you that we have the power to influence, but beyond that, most of it is totally beyond our control?
Mm.
And here's the caveat to that. Large portions of those interactions are controlled or guided by subconscious and unconscious behaviors or influences that by and large we have very little influence over. Things like our implicit memory, we hold back certain suppressed emotional interactions, certain memories of experiences. We have very limited range of perception with simply recording our senses. For instance, say you're walking down the street and selective focus comes into play. What you're able to sense, you hear certain sights and sounds, you recall a very limited number of things that are in your perceptual awareness. For instance, there might be a gentleman sitting across the street. He's over there. He has a certain look on his face, or he says a certain thing. Your mind and your brain and your neural imprinting throughout your body, it comes into play. It might have sensed that, yet you don't have a conscious awareness of it. You don't have that present access control. Now let's look at that idea of access control. That's anything we have the conscious awareness to call into recall, to have that perceptual understanding of, yes, I registered this experience or this data, this information, this interaction with another human being, my own interactions, including your own emotions, your own thoughts, your own sensory perceptions. But there are large chunks of that, and I'm not going to go into percentages because that becomes kind of a generalization a lot of times too, because how do we measure things accurately that we're not consciously recording to say, yes, this happened X, Y, and Z amount of times? So access control is much like a light switch. And I don't know how many people are watching on video, but I've got, our light here that has a little control, quote unquote, switch that makes things happen, that influences whether or not that light comes on. That's accessing the ability to make a decision and influence what happens. If we're aware of it, we can do it. What happens if I stop paying attention to that and I forget to turn the light back on? It's not in our access control. Now I'm unconscious of how I'm distracted, for instance. So to instigate this and carry that idea further, access control is that ability to influence. But what happens when that power goes out and I don't have the ability to push that button? This is how I like to make that correlation. Here a while back, we had a tornado go through our community and we lost power for 3 days. There was no power, no ability to get on the internet. We lost that ability to access control and influence what happens with that light. Now, there are large portions of our somatic embodied interactions, everything again from our memory to our sensory perception to how we recall past instances, that are tied, largely to our emotional processes. We have a very limited range of introspective ability to access that data. I say very limited range loosely because there again, how do we track things accurately that we're unaware of? So it becomes largely speculative and largely projected. It becomes very kind of limited in our context. So we hear a lot of things about the 90% equation of what's conscious and unconscious is largely a grossly overestimated, quote unquote, perspective a lot of times. We won't get into the whole background on that, where some of those concepts started, because that can become a whole nother conversation. But large portions of our introspection, our ability to access our emotional state, our mental state, our physiological state, and even down to our psychological state, are beyond access control of introspection. We don't have the conscious ability to recall it without outside influence. Now, I put that caveat in there. Outside influence. Something might trigger a memory that brings that out of your implicit memory. So we have implicit memory, that we have kind of that buried asset of conscious recording or unconscious recording. And then explicit memory, which are those memories and experiences we're able to instantly recall, or with simpler prompts, and that's generalizing again, more readily access. So again, it's that idea of access control versus infinite control.
Got it.
Infinite control is that blurry line where those parts we don't have the conscious ability to access without external outside influence, lies outside of our range of introspection, becomes a subconscious pattern known as the introspection illusion. I can't control what I recall from those or how I interplay with those. So therefore, we don't have infinite control. We have access and influence.
Wow.
That's kind of long and drawn
Great.
out, and I'm trying to simplify, but it's ultimately complex.
Great information. Thank you for sharing that. As I know we're getting towards the end of the show, and I know we're going to have you come back on to talk further on this, because I know there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. It is infinitely complex. And once we start generalizing it, we're automatically starting to break down. So I may have done a great disservice in a lot of regards.
No, you didn't. You really, I think you opened up the door for another discussion, which we could definitely dive into for a follow-up show. But I mean, in the meanwhile, I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us, to give us kind of some insights to this perspective and how we can construct, new belief system and how it can help us to move forward. I want to make sure the audience can get to, know you more. What is the best place they can contact you? Anything you're up to in this area, or anything you like to share with them that could help them?
Sure. So if you are curious about our subconscious and unconscious behavior patterns and how that affects and influences every aspect, I'm going to reinforce that, because that again is a subconscious pattern to be aware of. Reinforcement. Every aspect of your everyday life is influenced by subconscious and unconscious patterns. So in order to connect with that, we have an educational platform called The Light Inside. We also have a podcast called The Light Inside. That's a community of intellectually curious academics and change leaders. Our core focus is going to the causal level of these subconscious and unconscious patterns and understanding fully how they all interplay and interact with every area of our life. So you can find that at www.thelight, L-I-G-H-T, inside.site, S-I-T-E.
Got it.
You can find the podcast there, and you can also connect with our community and our coaching program.
Excellent. And we'll make sure to have that in the show notes as well. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for taking the time again, for being with us here today with your schedule, to enlighten us, to at least get the ball rolling in this area that I think is so valuable, and why so many people should be tapping into this for themselves and for their teams, their organizations, and getting in touch with somebody that understands this process, can help them move forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you truly for sharing this opportunity to connect with your community. I truly am grateful for that opportunity to open that doorway for change for others. So thank you.
Thank you. And listeners, we want to thank you each and every week for joining us here at Business Influencers with TALRadio. Again, we highly encourage you to listen to the show in its entirety later today. And again, reach out to Jeff A wealth of information. And again, now you can get a more personalized perspective on what he shared, as he'd be happy to share with you as it applies to where you are. So again, his information will be in the show notes as well. Till then, everybody, have a great rest of your week. Take care, and we'll see you next week.